Hey guys, Jacob here. Just want to really quickly go through iOS 15 and share a little bit more insight and clarify how this impacts email marketing. I know that this has been a sought after question by many of you in terms of, well, what impacts can we really expect with the update, and just a little bit more clarity in terms of some of the technical terms being thrown around. So in this video, we're really going to just quickly go through some of the strategies that we've implemented and seen work across our clients and some of the best practices that ESPs have released so far. We really want to break them down into sort of digestible terms, things that, right now today you can implement in your Klaviyo account, and just things, once again, that we've seen work well across with our clients in the face of the update. I'd also like to say that this has been something that we've seen coming down the pipe for a really long time. Everyone's really been talking about iOS 15 for weeks now, and since the major disruptions in paid ads world with iOS 14.6 and a lot of the tracking issues there, we really saw this as an important video to release just so that we can get this kind of content out there. Because at the end of the day, it's really not account specific, it's not ESP specific, it's across the board. So this distortion will appear in multiple places. It's not limited to any one account or any one store. But again, it's just really important to kind of understand what's what and get a little bit more clarity. So iOS 15, how will this affect email strategy going forward? And what are the main updates that we should be focused on? So the first is in terms of Apple privacy updates, mail privacy protection. This is kind of the big one that a lot of people have been focused on for months, and it's been kind of the doom and gloom one that people have talked about, where open rates will no longer be relevant to email marketing. So a few things to clarify there. Firstly, while open rates will now be optional for Apple Mail users, i.e. open tracking will be something that users can opt out of on Apple Mail specifically, regardless of the plan they're on, whether they're free iCloud users or if they're paid iCloud users or iCloud Plus users, they will have the option to block open tracking, which is problematic for a lot of reasons. Namely, a lot of our engagement metrics, our sunset strategies, our existing drip campaign strategies, automated strategies, they rely on open rates fundamentally. And open rates have always been a strong gauge of list health over time. So are people opening our emails? Are they clicking on our emails? Those two metrics kind of worked hand in hand together. So the Apple Mail update right now is making it very difficult to accurately gauge list health because it's artificially inflating or obfuscating email opens within specifically the Apple Mail client. And the way it's doing this is essentially by prefetching the pixel that is tracking the open and then essentially causing it to fire regardless of the end user's action. So for instance, what we've seen in beta testing and what ESPs have seen in beta testing has, for instance, been if an email is delivered to an Apple Mail client inbox, seconds or shortly after, you'll see a corresponding open event, which means that regardless of what the end user's action was, the open event that took place was actually a machine open that we're calling it, so an automatic open, because it was prefetched by this essentially this relay that Apple is doing within the Apple Mail app to, create essentially an open event that we then interpret as, oh, someone just opened our email, while the reality is the end user might have not even interacted with it. So going forward, this is really going to be a tricky metric to accurately use for accurate list health. And I would say that, it's going to be a lot less reliable than it has been in the past for instance, A/B testing of subject lines or, other strategies of that sort. Having said that, in terms of expected impact and adoption, our team has been looking at this as sort of a high adoption rate outcome due to the sort of availability of this choice. So if you are an Apple Mail user, you don't really have to dig around for this in your settings. It's something that you're prompted to opt in or out of. There's no pre-selected option, but it's one of the panels that you see when you open up your Apple Mail post iOS 15 after you've downloaded the update. So it's something that we're expecting high adoption rates with, sort of like we've seen with, upwards of 80 to 90% adoption on tracking with iOS 14.6. In terms of expected impact, we're expecting moderate to high open rate obfuscation due to this, in the sense of inflating opens. So if you've had historically, for instance, open rates between 10 and 15%, don't be necessarily patting yourself on the back too soon if this week you saw 25% open rates, because a lot of that could have just been correlated to the fact that you have a significant portion of your list that are Apple Mail clients, and they have now opted out of open tracking, where we're seeing this kind of artificial open event take place, and there's really no way to differentiate against that. So what we're recommending is just to start segmenting by client and start essentially, in some sense, questioning or even neglecting the accuracy of opens going forward. The other impact that we're seeing from the mail privacy protection is IP tracking and obfuscation there. We've seen that with IP addresses and previous tracking that's been available. The IP address is obfuscated upon open, so we're unable to track that if a user simply opens the email. However, the click event is where we would then again have that information become available, and we'd have visibility into that. The only caveat there is that if the end user's default browser is Safari, IP obfuscation upon click is also inaccurate. Or, the obfuscation occurs within the Safari browser. So in terms of next steps on this side of things, we recommend definitely, like I mentioned, segmenting by client. So have a good understanding of what your lists, segments are, in terms of what percentage of your email clients, or your subscribers are Apple Mail clients. And, ultimately the impact of this will be, correlated to that percentage. So if you have 40% of your list Apple Mail clients, you can expect the distortion to be greater than if you only had, for instance, 5 or 10%. Now, depending on the traffic that you've been collecting and the sort of audience that you're remarketing to, it might be a little bit swayed towards a high percentage of iOS users on mobile, right? So this is really account to account, but in terms of impact, it's across the board. Next is hide my email. Now the hide my email feature is basically something that Apple is now allowing paid iCloud users to do by prompting them with randomly generated proxy email addresses. So for instance, the typical one is blue126cat@icloud.com. This is a randomly generated email address, for instance, that you can use to hide your email address. So it basically acts as like a surrogate email. The expected adoption that we're seeing here, again, we're looking at low to moderate. And the reason why is this is only an available feature for iCloud Plus users, the paid iCloud version, which is, approximately 20 to 30% of the total users. So we're looking at fewer individuals taking advantage of this additional privacy option, but there are a few external results that will, kind of skew things further. One of those is that now you can potentially have multiple email addresses associated with the same user profile, but it's created or recognized within within your ESP, in our case Klaviyo, as a single profile, or as multiple profiles, So while in the past, I would be Jacob the Apple Group, and I would have my events take place. I could see when I'm initiating checkout. I can see when I'm clicking on an email. I can see when I'm, placing an order, and so on. This now could potentially be one person with multiple surrogate emails creating actions that are, scattered. And obviously you can still retarget off that. That's fine. You can, send the email to this profile. That's an abandoned cart, for instance, if they initiate. You can have the browse abandoned events if they're viewing. The only issue is that you can't necessarily link that back to a single user, which is problematic, of course, if you are trying to kind of get a good sense of, we had this, user, for instance, that opted in a year ago. and now we're trying to understand whether they are initiating checkout again, if they placed an order recently, if they use a surrogate address, are we sunsetting the other one? Like, it becomes a little bit of a puzzle there. This also can, going forward, result in a lot of dead weight on the list, in the sense that you have a lot of these email addresses that could at any point in time be deleted by the user. Apple will generate as many of these as you'd like to as a paid member. So you could at any point in time delete the hide my email that you're using, create a new one, and the whole process kind of starts over. I'd say considerations that I'd like, or the places I'd like to clarify, or the questions that we often get are like, well, what happens to existing email addresses now? Like, do I need this person's, hidden email address, or am I unable to email that person's hidden address? Do I need their new one to get through them? You don't, right? Because you're still emailing that end user. So if you have someone's existing email address, you will still be able to send them content. The only issue is that if they're hiding it with a new address now, you're not going to be able to doesn't necessarily recognize that new address is actually, representing this old one. And there's no real model to probabilistically tie those two together. The correlation is just too loose right now. So there's not really a way to know, because this person's taking this event, it's most likely this address. It's just a little bit too inconsistent. So now that we've had a chance to kind of look at some of the updates and what exactly it means for email marketing, let's kind of shift our mindset to how we can kind of prevent this from impacting our account performance, our list health, and some of the best practices and strategies that we've seen across our client accounts and that we recommend. So firstly, pre-iOS 15, one of the main priorities always for us has been list health and engagement. So just making sure that we are always keeping an eye on the segments that are, not only willing, but in fact looking forward to receiving our emails, and make sure that we're targeting them with content that's not only relevant, but also, delivering a lot of value. So open rate tracking and benchmarking has been something that for the past few months has really been a priority. Therefore, going into the update, we actually felt very secure about the sort of state at which our account health was at, across the board, really. So it's good to understand, if you haven't done this analysis yet, where have historic open rates been, and where would you like them to necessarily be? For instance, if you're seeing below 10% opens, I think there's a lot of segmentation work that can be done to, clean up that list a little bit and ensure that you're seeing, north of 15%, 20, 25% opens. And again, depending on the segment you're targeting, maybe sometimes higher. So with that said, having a really good understanding of your historic opens is something that will play a massive role in understanding what the landscape looks like for you when the data is a little bit more unclear, and being able to leverage that historic data to make decisions with respect to any cleanup that you can do now that the update has actually taken place. In terms of post iOS 15 though, which is really, I think, the most kind of most actionable kind of question, now that open rates are not necessarily on the table, what segmentation strategies and what recommendations are the ESPs giving? Are we seeing work well with our clients? And really, it's just taking a broader look at other events that maybe we haven't necessarily considered engagement metrics yet. So it's not uncommon for us to, at this point, examine click a little bit better than we have in the past. Click has always been the primary metric that we've been after, even though open rates have been incredibly important for gauging list health in the past and just general, send strategy, A/B testing subject lines, things of that sort. Click to open ratio has always been, in our minds, a very, very, I'd say that was sort of the key metric that we were looking at. In our eyes, it was really, is the subject line through the copy, the content, the message, the CTA, consistent and relevant to that user that's opening. And the lower that percentage of people clicking through our emails relative to those opening, the weaker our content or our angle or our CTA or what have you, was. So click tracking will really, if it hasn't already been a kind of North Star metric, it'll slowly become that. And then other corresponding metrics such as, viewed product events, active on-site events, initiate checkout events. All of these are perfect examples of ways that you can kind of gauge and determine what, an engaged subscriber is to you. I wouldn't say there's a one size fits all, but one thing that we've seen success with, mathematically speaking, is just taking a look at, well, if 180-day engaged open or a 90-day engaged open corresponds to X amount of recipients, where does that exactly mean our on-site engagement corresponds to that, for instance, or an initiate checkout or purchase event or so on. So being able to build segments that kind of take that into account is very, very important. And then in terms of kind of protecting yourself from sending to profiles that are not engaged, not opening, and are really, otherwise up for sunset, well, one metric is definitely just looking at the age of that profile. So when was that profile created? When did they subscribe? How long have we been marketing to them? How many emails have they received over all time? And then lastly, really meaningful analytics. So again, in terms of click tracking, that will remain to be one of the main metrics that we'll be tracking on our end. Click to open ratio, that's been historically an important one. So if we're assessing pre-iOS 15 performance and trying to benchmark with, kind of a target to either improve upon or maintain with iOS 15, I would say that would be a really important one to look at historically. One thing that we're recommending to our clients and anyone really is just taking a look at the segmentation of your list by email client and, isolating, the metrics that you'd like for each one in particular opens historically, and trying to get a month over month kind of last 365-day look at where have historic email opens been for for Apple Mail and mobile Safari users, and where do we see those trending? If we see a massive spike, month over month in October, for instance, and for that matter in September, well, that might give us a pretty good gauge for how large an impact is this really having on our list. Lastly, just wanted to go through a couple of FAQs. How will clicks be affected? So like we covered in the previous slide, clicks will actually be one of our most important metrics. If it already isn't, it will be surely one of your most important metrics going forward. Now, in terms of the update and how it impacts click, there are a few caveats as well. While click tracking will not be obfuscated the same way that email tracking, open tracking, will be in email, we will see an impact on click tracking within Safari, for instance, with IP obfuscation and things of that sort. So this is where we might see further distortion down the line. It doesn't mean that necessarily won't be able to track that click event, but there may be metadata within that is not necessarily available to us. How will historic open data be affected? Short answer, historic open data won't be affected by this. This is an update that's going to be affecting open tracking going forward. And this is, again, not going to be across the board necessarily, but it's for Apple Mail users. Now, in terms of which Apple Mail users, it will be for those who choose to opt out of open tracking, which you can expect a significant portion of or a significant percentage of all users to do. Again, this is for all Apple Mail users, not just paid plan, like Hide My Email is, for instance. And then lastly, if not open rates, well, then what are we really going to be looking at? And the truth is that there are a lot of metrics that our team has been using long before iOS 15 was even rumored to be, a concern. Click tracking, web and site activity tracking, viewed product events, if you are integrated properly with any sort of e-commerce platform you're using, you will want to be leveraging web tracking events such as viewed product, active on site. You'll want to be definitely pulling events that are related to conversion. So of course, segmenting by purchases, segmenting by initiate checkout, add to cart. These will all be essential for building segments that are relevant and targeting those segments with relevant content. even in campaign strategy, but of course continuing to do so in automations and flows. And then of course, age of profile. So when was the profile created? When did someone opt in? And so on. Of course, there's going to be caveats there with the new hide my email and multiple profiles potentially occupying a single end user. But at the end of the day, this will still be an important metric when it comes to how long a profile has been on your list and whether it's time to potentially sunset it if it doesn't meet other criteria beyond open. So again, very important. And then lastly, in terms of immediate steps, I would highly, highly recommend freezing segments in terms of lists that are static with historically accurate data sooner than later while that data is still relevant. So pre-iOS 15, looking at opens and maybe freezing your different respective segments from 30, 60, 90, 120 to 180 day, just so that you have that information available to you to kind of benchmark against. Next steps, segmenting by email client or segmenting just by, for instance, how many profiles do you have that are iCloud already, and maybe watching that change over time. Looking at email client, so for instance, Safari, mobile Safari and Apple Mail, taking a look there. And then of course, trying to build new segments that are relevant to your business surrounding web tracking, click tracking, site activity, viewed product, and trying to get a little bit more granular and a little bit more targeted in your segmentation, in your approach to segmentation, whereas before you could do kind of a big, anyone who's open, for instance, approach. Lastly, I know I said lastly, but it's always an important caveat when we're looking at the sort of discrepancy between historic open. So for instance, the size of a 90-day engaged segment with open and then without open, you'll see tremendous drop off in terms of the number of subscribers, because of course unless your click rate is click-through rate is 1-to-1 with your open rate, you will see fewer profiles. So it's important that you're not over excluding as well, but you're taking a close look at who is still a relevant subscriber to you and who is marketable in the future. Again, if you watch this whole video, I hope this was helpful to you. Like I said, we'll be releasing a lot more info as time comes and more strategies that we see work across the board. This is just our first initial sort of invitation to start this kind of conversation and start talking about some of the impacts of the update itself. And of course, we'll be sharing with you guys any sort of strategies that we're implementing with our clients that we're seeing working across the board, and any sort of updates that ESPs release as this gains a little bit more light and we learn a little bit more about the true impact of this. But overall, there's really not too much to worry about with this update. Of course, it's going to change the landscape for us and it's going to make things a little bit more difficult. But nevertheless, we saw this coming. So with all the best practices that we've been using, I think that there will be a lot of opportunity to data mine further our lists and understand our customer even better. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope this was useful to you, and we'll see you on the next video.